Stop me if this sounds familiar. You're a kid on your first adventure through the Johto region who just made it to Goldenrod City, and after enjoying the sights and losing all of your Pokédollars to a budding gambling addiction, you decide it's finally time to face the local gym. You've heard from your friends on the playground that Whitney is tough, but you're not scared of her. After all, your Cyndaquil has already evolved into Quilava, and you even have a Pidgey on the team for the unlikely case where you have to send in backup. This should be easy, you think, and head into the gym to claim your badge and get one step closer to becoming the Johto champion. Yeah, Whitney is kind of hard. I'm sure almost all of us have a story about Whitney and her Miltank, whose cute face, strong bones, and spherical body turned it into the ultimate weapon of the Johto region. But how good was Whitney really? This is a question I wanted to answer, which is why she's going to be the next challenge in our BQ series. Today we'll put her to the test and try to solo her with every single Pokemon in the Johto Regional Pokedex in an attempt to see just how strong she really is. This is the 4th entry in my BQ ranking series, and follows our last challenge against Gym Leader Claire. So how does Johto's 3rd Gym Leader stack up to her senpai? Let's find out. But first, we'll need to take a look at the rules. The main goal of this challenge is to fight Whitney with each Pokemon in the HeartGold SoulSilver Regional Pokedex one by one. And once we're done, we'll compare the number of Pokemon that could solo her with the total number of Pokemon used to get our Bruno quotient, a rough measure of her strength or weakness as a trainer. Based on her team size and the level of her ace, we'll be tackling this challenge with a 1.1 times level modifier on all of our Pokemon, meaning they each have to beat her at level 21 or die trying. I've also committed to setting as many of my Pokemon as possible to male, as this will allow the fight to work as intended and force my Pokemon to overcome their undying affection for Whitney's cow in order to earn their victories. As for what we can do to our Pokemon, I've made a slight change from the last few videos. Up to now, I've allowed anything to go. Full EVs and IVs, any legal moveset, and all held items were fair game for me in the challenge. But this time, I'm going to alter that a bit. Whitney is an early game trainer, which means she has a pretty limited team. Don't get me wrong, she's incredibly powerful, but she just doesn't have access to the breadth of moves and items that the game offers, so it doesn't really seem fair to go at her full blast right from the get-go. So instead, I've decided to split this challenge up into 2 sets. First will be the legitimate set, where I try to maximize the Pokemon based on what resources would be available at that point in the game. To do this, I've come up with this list of TMs and held items that we could feasibly have acquired at this point in the game, and I've also limited our available number of EVs from the full 510 to 107, or about 20%. I mostly picked this percentage at random, so if you have a better way to calculate it and make our number of EVs fair for the trainer, I'd love to hear it. But anyway, for our first batch of 20 attempts, we'll use these restrictions while attempting to keep our Pokemon as evenly powered to Whitney's team as possible. And any Pokemon that are able to solo her team under those restrictions within 20 attempts will give us a full point toward our final BQ. After that, I'll allow myself 20 more attempts at the fight for any Pokemon that wasn't able to do it in the first round, this time with all TMs and held items available, and access to the full spread of 510 EVs. And any of these Pokemon that can get a win in this second round will earn half a point to our total. For this video, I've decided to allow hidden power only in this second round instead of the first, which will hopefully help to curb its power against these monotype gym leaders. However, I've still kept non-held items, one-hit KO moves, attract, and evasion altering moves such as double team and smokescreen totally banned. Although I think that some of these moves can now be put back up for discussion with the implementation of the 2-round system. For example, with how few Pokemon learn moves like Sand Attack, Smokescreen, and Fissure, I think an argument could be made to allow these in the second round only, to give some weaker Pokemon a chance to use these unique strengths to earn that half point. But I'll ultimately leave that decision up to all of you, so let me know what you think about that in the comments. And now that all of the rules have been covered, I think it's time to take a trip back through time and prove once and for all whether Whitney is really the demon we all remember her to be. Same as always, I'll take this type by type, so let's kick things off with water. Thanks to the local game corner, we were able to leverage our crippling gambling addiction into a strength by picking up the Ice Beam TM. This is an incredibly strong move that can be learned by a lot of the water type Pokemon in this game, and using its 95 base power, we were able to net victories with the Poliwag, Slowpoke, Psyduck, Staryu, Shelder, Remoraid, Chinchou, Seal, and Squirtle lines, and also beat her with Quagsire, Corsola, Vaporeon, Mantine, Lapras, and Suicune. We also pick up some more simple victories in this type through the use of Swords Dance and a physically attacking move, which as usual is pretty much an instant win button. And doing this, we also net victories with the Totodile, Tentacool, and Krabby lines. But from here, we have to rely on some more varied strategies for the rest of the water types, drawing whatever strengths we can out of their move pools to sink Whitney. Marill, Azumarill, and Quillfish each take a page out of Whitney's book and show her what it's like to be swept by Rollout, while the Horsey line uses an eclectic mix of Bubble Beam, Blizzard, and Flash Cannon to get the job done. Gyarados, being the absolute powerhouse that it is, gets a simple win with Return, and Seeking relies on a haphazard mix of Water Pulse and Supersonic to secure our last round 1 victory for the water type. These results were pretty good, but there were 2 little guys whose poor stats kept them from toppling Whitney in the first round. Although Wooper did have Ice Beam like its older brother Quagsire, I was never quite able to pick up a win before her Miltank knocked our tiny buddy out, and Goldine's poor moveset was a major inhibiting factor to its success, and it never got quite lucky enough with Confusion to make it through within 20 attempts. Luckily for both of these Pokemon though, we have round 2, and once the gloves were off and our friends were buffed up to the max, they each defeated Whitney using Hidden Power, earning half a point each. And finally, there's your boy Magikarp. It'll probably surprise no one that Magikarp wasn't able to get the job done in round 1, but even giving it access to all of the items didn't help much. I tried different combinations of the Choice Band, Metronome, and even the Bright Powder with its lackluster moveset, but Tackle and Bounce could only take this guy so far, and after all 40 attempts we never saw a victory, leaving us with 44 out of 256 victories at the end of the water type. To follow that up, we'll take a look at the grass type, which was overall not very difficult this time around. Our easiest wins, of course, came with those Pokemon who could use Swords Dance, which gained us early victories from the Bellsprout, Oddish, Sunkern, Execute, Tangela, and Bulbasaur lines. Wildly enough, that's actually the majority of the Pokemon in this type, leaving us only with the Chikorita and Hoppip lines to finish it off. Chikorita had to work a little bit to see the win, relying on a combination of Reflect to reduce physical damage, and oh wait, they also just used Swords Dance. Having a type this easy was honestly a breath of fresh air, and we leave the grass type with our total having risen to 66 out of 256. Then, to finish off the classic type trio, we'll be covering the fire type next. This type is always interesting to me because there aren't actually that many fire type moves, and so things generally tend to go about the same for most members of this type. Our battles against Whitney were no different, especially taking into account that both Flamethrower and Fire Blast are obtainable in Goldenrod, and every single one of our fire types relied on these 2 moves to find a victory. Although it was occasionally touch and go, it didn't take very long to finish off the fire type, bringing our total number of victories up to 86 out of 256. The flying type, similar to fire, also didn't require much variation, but it was similarly scary due to all of these Pokemon sharing a weakness to Rollout. Thankfully for us, all of these Pokemon also possessed the normal type, so Stab Return was the obvious answer to get quick victories with the Spearow and Doduo lines, along with Farfetch'd and Noctowl. Pidgey, being a bit weaker than these other flying types, took a little bit more doing, and possibly would have failed round 1 if it weren't for a lucky crit securing it a win over Whitney's Miltank. The only actual pressure point for us in this fight was Hoothoot, who's probably the weakest of the bunch. Although it has access to Hypnosis, which would usually be enough to secure a win, Whitney made the smart call of including a Lumberry on her ringer, which means that rather than hitting Hypnosis and riding that wave to a victory, we had to hit it once, survive a meaty hit from her Miltank, and then hit it again to even have a chance at a victory. This may have been possible with some good luck, but I didn't have any, and after our 20 attempts we ended round 1 with a failure on Hoothoot. Round 2 on the other hand was much smoother, as the extra EVs helped a lot with survivability and gave me the opportunity to put her Pokemon to sleep with Hypnosis, live to tell the tale, and then take her out with Dream Eater. Once Hoothoot was finished, we end up with a total of 95.5 out of 256. The electric type is also similar to fire in that one strategy dominates all of the others: Thunderwave, Thunderbolt, and Prophet. Although Miltank is certainly bulky enough, it's not as good at withstanding special attacks, and as a result it was never exceedingly difficult for us to find a win with our electric types, especially when Pokemon like Pichu had access to Nasty Plot to boost its offenses and tear through her team with the Wrath of God. Our only 2 Pokemon that didn't rely on Thunderbolt to get the job done were Voltorb and Electrode, two orbular guys who put their body shape to good use and knocked her out with a high-powered rollout to seal the deal and bring us to 110.5 out of 256 victories. The only type cool enough to follow up after something with as much zing as the electric type is everyone's favorite, Grock. These Pokemon may be a bit of a mixed bag offensively, but defensively the majority are pretty strong, with all of the rock types resisting most of her Clefairy and Miltank's movesets. This defensive strength allowed me to approach each line with its own set of strategies, and actually turned out to be surprisingly fun. With the ground type, things were pretty simple for the majority of them, a combination of Swords Dance and Return being all that were required for the Sandshrew, Cubone, and Rhyhorn lines, and also for Gligar. Along with them, we also turned her own strategy against her once again with Phanpy and Donphan, who got an easy victory through rollout. Diglett and Dugtrio were the only ground types who caused me any problem, as their weak physical defenses and lack of a normal resistance left them sitting ducks for Miltank's powerful feat. While Dugtrio was able to leverage its superior strength to finish things off with magnitude, Diglett never got the chance, with her Miltank burying it in the ground over and over again until we hit our 20 attempt limit and failed round 1. Even so, our revenge was relatively easy to obtain, as the addition of a Choice Band and the Earthquake TM to Diglett made it powerful enough to sweep through her team and earn us an extra half a point. On the rock side of the Grock type, however, we were able to rely on their strong defenses to run much more diverse movesets for this fight. With the Geodude line, magnitude was sufficient to finish off her Clefairy, after which I put everything on the line to feint her Miltank with self-destruct to earn a win, while Sudowoodo kept things simple with low kick, letting Miltank's high weight do the heavy lifting. For the fossils, Ammonite and Amistar found success with our off-brand rollout technique, Kabuto and Kabutops did the same, and Aerodactyl focused on return and wing attack to end her team. Larvitar, with its high attack, was able to use Leer, Rock Slide, and Return to gain a victory for its evolutionary line, and suddenly we were down to our last Grock type, Onix. I don't want to spend too much time here belaboring the point. If you want to see a complete breakdown on why Onix sucks, be sure to check out the Bruno BQ. But suffice to say, he is bad. Although in this case, his high defense gives him plenty of chances to survive and dish out damage, he was down worse for Miltank than I was for that goth girl in Spy Kids 3D in the 2nd grade, and he was never able to deal with Attract effectively enough to get us a win in round 1. Round 2, of course, was much simpler due to the addition of Earthquake, and with the half a point we picked up there, we end the Grock type having reached 133.5 out of 256. Moving on to the Poison type, our fights against Whitney became a little more lopsided. While some lines, such as the Nidos with Double Kick and Coughing with Return and Self-Destruct, were near instant wins, other Pokemon like Grimer, Muck, Crobat, and Arbok had to work a little harder to make it through Whitney, utilizing a combination of Harden, Disable, Confuse Ray, Glare, and Protect to keep themselves alive, break up both the Miltank's defenses and offenses, and find a way to bring her Titan of a Pokemon down and secure the victory. For 3 of these Pokemon, however, even that wasn't enough, and in round 1 I wasn't able to get the win within 20 attempts on Zubat, Golbat, or Ekans. Now, the little guys Zubat and Ekans having trouble here wasn't exactly surprising to me, as their stats and move pools at level 21 are overall pretty weak, but I was a little taken aback by Golbat not being able to get it done, especially with both Confuse Ray and Wing Attack present within its arsenal. But I gave it 20 attempts and I never quite broke through her defenses, meaning my only choice was to move on to round 2, equip them each with a Choice Band, and grind Whitney to dust with Gale Force Winds and Quaking Earth. With these 3 Pokemon adding their half points to the score, we end the Poison type with 147 out of 256 victories, and progress to the Psychic type. As I mentioned earlier, Whitney's Miltank, while bulky, is more susceptible to special damage than physical, and that's something that the Psychic type has in spades. Utilizing this high special attack, we were able to get easy wins via Unknown and Hidden Power Fighting, the Abra line and Charge Beam, Mr. Mime and Focus Blast, the Natu line and Solar Beam, Espeon and Confusion/Hyper Beam, Lugia and Mewtwo with Ice Beam, and Celebi with Magical Leap. The only 2 Pokemon here that relied on physical attacks were Mew, for whom Swords Dance and Return were too attractive of a combination to pass up, and Hypno, who, without access to Dream Eater, had to resort to punching kids in the face to drain their life forces. Drowsy, unfortunately, turned out to not be quite as strong as his father, and I wasn't able to get a win within the first 20 using Drain Punch, leaving us to wait until round 2 to pick up half a point via Psychic instead. And then, for our final Pokemon in this type, we have Wobbuffet. Wobbuffet is always an incredibly interesting Pokemon in these challenges because it can only learn 4 moves: Counter, Mirror Coat, Safeguard, and Destiny Bond. and thus has to rely on its opponent to deal damage for it. This time around, this led to an interesting situation for us, because rather than Whitney's Miltank being the Pokemon to beat, it became her Clefairy. This was mostly because, being honest with you, her Clefairy is weak as hell, and even getting a counter off against its double slap rarely got us more than a few HP in damage. Add on to that the fact that its only other attacking move was Metronome, forcing us to take a guess on whether she'd be hitting for physical or special damage, and this was practically impossible out of the gate, and we never got the win in round 1. Being honest with you all, I actually thought this would have ended up being the case in our second round as well, because even though I could give it better EVs, its moveset wouldn't change, nor would the fact that Whitney's Clefairy was trash. But as fate would have it, the moment I loaded up my new and improved Wobbuffet and started my round 2 fights, her Clefairy top-decked Lunar Dance and knocked itself out, which gave us a clear path to victory over her enraged, stomping teammate. This was some pretty good luck, and I'm actually not sure whether we would have gotten this half point if not for the self-assassination. And I also think the irony of Clefairy, a Pokemon known for its connection to the moon, knocking itself out with Cresselia's signature move is just delicious. When it comes to the fighting type, although I really wish I were able to just give you another Drake and Josh montage and move on, we actually had a tiny bit of trouble here. Of course, being the primary weakness of the normal type, most of the Pokemon here were able to use Low Kick, Brick Break, or some other decently strong fighting move to take her out, but that did not include the lil guy Tyrogue. Given the only fighting type move available to this Pokemon at this point in the game is Rock Smash, I knew this one wouldn't be a cakewalk. But I did think that Return would have a decent chance of giving us a shot, but that turned out to be nothing more than a pipe dream. At the end of the day, Tyrogue just hasn't done enough cow tipping with his older brothers to know how to handle this fight, and we had to wait around until round 2 to finish things off with Brick Break and get us that half a point. But once that was done, we finished the fighting type and brought our total up to 169.5 out of 256. Next, I want to take a look at the endgame types Steel, Ice, Ghost, Dark, and Dragon. Although all of these types have varying strategies for taking on Whitney, their general high power made it so that most of them were relatively simple, and I think it's best to just tackle them together. Steel, being created as the ultimate defensive type, had no trouble tanking whatever Whitney could throw at it, and Steelix and Skarmory had all the time in the world to hit her Pokemon with Return until her Clefairy and Miltank had left this world behind. For the Ice types, given our access to Ice Beam and their stab damage on it, I ran that move on each of the Ice-type Pokemon and gained victories with the Bird Bros, Delibird, and Articuno, and also with the Smoochum and Swinublinds no problem. Turning over to Ghost, the only type with a total immunity to normal damage, things were similarly easy, and we used Hypnosis, Confuse Ray, and the strong Thunderbolt to secure our victories in this type and move on to Dark, where our strategies diversified just a touch. Umbreon, being bulky as all get out, did a great job at tanking damage while dropping her defenses with Tail Whip, and then taking her Pokemon out with Return, while Houndour and Houndoom buffed up their attacks with Howl and knocked her team out that way. Murkrow is a Pokemon that always hits harder than I would have expected it to, and didn't have any trouble feinting its two opponents. At which point we moved on to the final Dark type Sneasel, who used Leer and its strong physical attack to clean things up with Return. And after that, all that was left was the Dratini line, whose strategy was the simplest of all. Luckily for us, Dratini can learn the move Dragon Rage super early, a move that does a set 40 damage, which just so happens to be more than half of Miltank's HP, and lets us sail to a clean victory over her team, bringing us up to 190.5 out of 256 victories. As our penultimate type, it's time to go over Bug. This type is always a trip because of the disparity in strength between its members, and this time around was no different. Of course, we had some Swords Dancers in the mix, allowing for some quick wins with the Leddyba, Paris, and Scyther lines, but beyond that, we had to rely on the specific strengths of each Pokemon to beat Whitney. Pineco and Fortress, with their strong defenses, were able to deal with Clefairy via Bug Bite and then toss out a quick self-destruct to feint the Miltank, while Pokemon like Butterfree, Yanma, Yanmega utilized their strong special attack stats and Silver Wind to great effect. With Venonat, on the other hand, I actually ended up going for a more physical set and finished things off with Bug Bite, Disable, and Supersonic. Heracross and Pinsir both had Brick Break, so those fights were practically a given, and Ariados and Beedrill both had high enough attack stats to see them through. That's all of the easy ones done, but there are actually 2 more Pokemon that made it through the fight in their first 20 attempts, and their identities may surprise you. Metapod and Kakuna are usually pretty bad at fighting in general, but against 2 normal types they actually have some pretty notable strengths. In this generation, instead of getting stuck with Harden, they actually gain the move Iron Defense, which is kind of like the Swords Dance of shitty bug Pokemon. After bumping up their defenses to the max, we were able to utilize the slight accuracy drop on Whitney's moves afforded by the Bright Powder to survive way longer than they had any right to, while nibbling on the opponent all the while. Thanks to this survivability, it was just a matter of time before they each got a crit or two that allowed them to feint the Miltank and get a beautiful victory. But of course, this didn't apply to their younger forms, Caterpie and Weedle, neither of whom had the benefit of raised defense to survive this fight. Instead, for these Pokemon, I turned toward round 2, equipping them each with a choice band that raised their attack, and brought Bug Bite's damage to a level that made a victory possible with just a little luck. So, for once, I was actually able to get a victory with all 4 of these little guys, even if there's a bit of an asterisk on it. The other 2 Pokemon that only got their victories in round 2 were Spinarak, who seemed to need the EV attack buff to make things work, and Shuckle, whose poor learn set kept it from beating Whitney in the first round, but who had no trouble finishing her off when Earthquake was on the table. And with that, we finished the bug type, bringing our number of victories up to 211.5 out of 256. And finally come to the last type we need to cover, the normal type. I kept this one until the end, mostly because it's Whitney's type, but also because I had to use some wild strategies to make it through this. So let's take a look. There are very few strategies that are set in stone in this type, but Stab Return is never a bad option, and using just that, we're able to get wins with the Rattata, Apom, Snubble, Meowth, Lickitung, Teddiursa, and Porygon lines, and also with Stantler, Tauros, Eevee, Kangaskhan, and Snorlax. From there, the strategies generally diverge based on Pokemon, although there are a few overarching themes. For the Igglybuff, Togepi, and Chansey lines, and also with Clefairy and Clefable, I use the high damage move Flamethrower in tandem with moves like Sing, Yawn, and Charm, and the Metronome Held item to whittle away at her Pokemon until they fainted. I also try this with Cleffa, but because it's just a little guy, it was really tough. And although on attempt 20 of round 1 it really looked like I was gonna get it, Cleffa just couldn't clutch it out, and I was forced to go for that half point in round 2 using Sing, Hidden Power, and Dream Eater instead. After that, because if it ain't broke we shouldn't try to fix it, I used Rollout on Dunsparce and Miltank to prove to Whitney that the store brand Tumbleoff is actually better than the original, and then picked up another quick win with Girafarig via Psybeam. The most interesting Pokemon in this type was actually Smeargle, because although under an unrestricted rule set this Pokemon is akin to a god, in this case I had to try to limit it to moves that it would have been able to encounter in Johto leading up to our fight with Whitney. This was actually way more limiting than I assumed it would be at first, because without TMs I was left with a whack assortment of slightly useful moves on a statistically mediocre Pokemon. The set that I eventually ended up going with was Toxic Spikes, which I would set up early to clear the Miltank's Lumberry and give me a chance to use Sleep Powder to get the Miltank out of action immediately upon coming out. Then I filled my final 2 slots with Tail Whip to lower its defense, and Headbutt to get a strong stab move that we would have been able to encounter in the wild before the fight with Whitney. I don't know if this was technically the best set I could have chosen, but it felt like one of the more sensible loadouts for what I wanted to accomplish. Even so, we got dangerously close to losing on round 1, only picking up the victory with Smeargle on attempt 19 out of 20. Whew. And next, I'd like to take a look at Mr. Ditto, who always presents us with a real journey in these challenges. This time around, Ditto will be taking the form of Whitney's Clefairy, and as I discussed earlier, this thing is trash, with its only consistent damage coming in the form of Double Slap. Although the wildcard of Metronome could technically offer us a path to victory, with only 5 uses of this, we would essentially have to hope to get a one-hit KO move like Guillotine on the Miltank, and this obviously didn't happen during my first 20 attempts. This fact also didn't really change during round 2, and although I tried to see what would happen with the leveling up all transformed cheese that we've used in the past, at level 21, even if this were to increase Ditto's stats slightly, I really don't think it would make a difference, and we ended up with a total failure on Ditto. Which brings us to our final line in the normal type, Sentret and Furret. Now, you may be asking, Andrew, what's so special about these 2 Pokemon that made you keep them until the end? And the answer to that question would be, nothing really, unless you count being so weak that the fight inadvertently became interesting a specialty. See, my core strategy here was pretty simple. Defense Curl as an option to buff our defense, and Return to do as much damage as we could. The real annoying thing about this fight was that Return was definitely doing enough damage that it should have been possible with good luck, but everything just kept going wrong. Whether it be flinching to Stomp or getting crits on the Clefairy but never the Miltank, it felt like the universe just didn't want me to beat her with Sentret. And by the time I was on the 20th attempt in round 1, I had honestly given up, and was already thinking of strategies for round 2. But then, miraculously, all of the luck that had previously slipped through our fingers seemed to come back to me, and the Sentret hit a crit on Clefairy to knock it out in one hit, and then hit another crit through the Miltank's Attract to take it down into KO range. Unfortunately, our luck immediately seems to turn around, with 2 immobilization turns leading to 2 eaten stomps that left us at only 9 HP on our final attempt. This was the moment I gave up, but Sentret had faith, and I looked into its eyes and knew I had to go for that final return. And that's when it happened. The Miltank's AI went for rollout, as it always seemed to do when my Pokemon were low on HP, and Sentret put everything it had into its own survival, clinging to life with a single HP, swiping left on the Miltank to hit through Attract, and finally taking it down with a final return. Good job, little buddy. I can't believe you did it. With our final type finished, our number of victories over Whitney now sits at 246 out of 256. Converting this number into a BQ, we end up with 96, just a little worse than Claire's current score on the difficulty scale. I'm not sure about all of you, but this result is a little surprising to me. I knew that Whitney probably wouldn't be quite as hard as we all remembered her, but the fact that we only ended up 10 points down and with 18 failures in round 1 is kind of shocking. As kids, we all thought that she was a paragon of strength, but really it was just us that needed to get good and realize that our Pokemon could learn moves that do more than deal damage. And now that we have, we could fill a stadium with Whitney's tears. But that's going to be the end of the challenge, which means it's time for us to vote on who I'll be facing next in the BQ series. Based on this poll that I recently ran on the channel, the 2 options I'd like you to choose between today are Hoenn's Norman and Tate and Liza, 2 tough trainers that each present different challenges. For example, if we go with Norman, we'll be able to go in with our standard rule set, although we may want to consider a ban on the Protect TM, as pretty much every Pokemon can learn it, and it makes his slacking into a non-factor. Although it might be fair to just consider this a weakness of his team and allow the TM anyway, I'd be more inclined to take the stance we took in making all of our Pokemon male in this episode, and ban it so that we're facing off against the enemy Pokemon as intended. As for Tate and Liza, if we choose them, we might need to alter things a little bit to accommodate for the fact that it's a double battle. Assuming we don't just go in like normal with a single Pokemon at the 1.3 times level cap, I currently have 2 possibilities in mind. 1, we go in with a single Pokemon, but raise the level cap modifier slightly to make the 2v1 more fair. Or 2, we keep the level cap the same, but go in with 2 of the same Pokemon instead of 1, so that we're still engaging in the fight as intended. This second option seems a lot more interesting to me, but as always, I'll try to go with what seems most popular in the comments, so make sure to let me know what you think. I'd also appreciate it if anyone would like to weigh in on a potential level modifier for Tate and Liza if we go in with 2 of the same Pokemon, because I'm not quite sure if we should treat them as having 4 Pokemon and level both up to 1.3 times her race, or treat their team as 2 sets and go in with the 1.1 times modifier we used here. Either way, I'll be looking forward to the next one. But before I end this video, I also want to very quickly ask what you think about the current rule set. Personally, I was pretty happy with how the 2-round system worked out for this challenge, because it gave us a chance to see how a Pokemon would perform under more realistic conditions, and also under theoretical conditions. So rather than have any kind of long discussion about how to change things, I really just wanted to see what you would all think if I continued forward with this rule set for the future of the BQ challenge. If possible, I'd like to get this rule set settled soon so that I can move on to some more widely popular trainers like Cynthia. So if there's anything you think really needs to be addressed, be sure to let me know in the comments. Specifically, I'd like to know your opinions on reintroducing moves like Sand Attack, Fissure, etc. in round 2, or if you all think those should continue to be universally banned alongside Double Team and Attract. But that's going to be all for me today. If you want to make sure you see the next entry of this series, along with any other Nuzlockes, challenge runs, or discussions we put out, be sure to subscribe. So I hope you have a good day today, remember to tell someone you love them, and as always, stay phenomenal.